Jean-Michel Basquiat. Say the name and an image probably pops into your head, right? The electrifying, kind of tragic genius of the 1980s New York art scene. You know, friend of Warhol, downtown superstar, someone who burned incredibly bright before his death at just 27. His art sells for millions, his style is absolutely iconic, but there's a side to his work that we often miss. A hidden language, a secret code, buried right under all that vibrant chaos.
We all know his signature three-pointed crown. It's everywhere. He used it to anoint his heroes and himself as royalty. But that crown, it's just the tip of the iceberg. See, his paintings aren't just raw, explosive emotion. They are dense historical texts, just filled with this complex code. And today, we're gonna crack it. And this is our first major clue. We have to kind of toss out that old myth of the purely instinctual street artist. Basquiat was a voracious reader, a complete sponge, a self-taught historian, and he said it himself. His paintings came directly from his studies. He was an intellectual who used the canvas like a giant chaotic notebook, sampling from the entire sweep of human history.
All right, so to really understand this code, we first have to push past the public persona, the myth that's been built up around the guy.
And look, the story we all know, it's a great story. This mysterious graffiti poet, Samo C., who just takes the downtown art world by storm, befriends the legendary Andy Warhol, becomes a global phenom, all of it marked by that famous crown. It's a super compelling narrative, for sure, but it's really only the cover of a much, much more complicated book.
Because here's the thing, and this is absolutely crucial. Buried in those canvases is this deep, intense obsession with classical antiquity. He's referencing Roman emperors, Greek philosophers, ancient African kingdoms. So you gotta ask, why? What was a 20th century New York artist doing messing with the building blocks of Western civilization? What was he trying to tell us?
To answer that, we're gonna use one painting as our Rosetta Stone. Let's really dive in and see how he builds this entire worldview on a single, sprawling canvas. Okay, here it is, Jawbone of an Ass from 1982. Now, I know, at first glance it just looks like a chaotic jumble of words and images, but it's actually a highly structured, almost encyclopedic history of power and conflict. Believe it or not, this one painting holds the key to Basquiat's entire historical project.
Just look at how he organizes history here. The painting is totally non-chronological. He starts with a biblical reference, then he dives into Renaissance Italy, and then he jumps backwards thousands of years to antiquity before finally landing in American history. He's collapsing time, literally drawing lines between these seemingly disconnected moments of conflict.
And check out his technique. See all those crossed out words? That's not him making mistakes. He famously said, "I cross out words so you will see them more." It's brilliant, right? The very act of trying to hide something makes you lean in. It makes you want to read it even more. He's weaponizing erasure to force our attention, to highlight the ideas he really wants us to wrestle with.
So, we've seen how he layers all these historical references. But the bigger question is still just hanging there. Why? Why was he so obsessed with antiquity?
This, right here, is the core of his argument. For Basquiat, the Roman Empire was this powerful, almost perfect analog for the United States. I mean, think about it. A global power with massive imperial ambitions? Check. A culture built on the backs of slaves? Check. A society facing constant threats from both inside and out? Check. By painting Rome, he was painting America.
Now, within this big historical code, one specific conflict was especially important to him. It was a series of 3 wars, a clash of titans that pitted Europe against Africa and basically shaped the ancient world.
The Punic Wars. For Basquiat, this wasn't just some dusty old history lesson. No way. It was this incredible metaphor. You had Rome, the rising European empire, fighting Carthage, a formidable North African power. This ancient conflict became his historical blueprint for the long, brutal history of European colonialism and African resistance. It was history, as they say, rhyming with the present.
But he wasn't just interested in some simple black and white conflict. He was also digging into the complexity of power itself. In this painting, for example, he traces how early Christians, who were brutally persecuted by the Roman Empire, eventually became the empire. The victims became the victors, and they started wielding the very same kind of power they once resisted.
And this critical, questioning approach to the past, it wasn't just a phase for him. It was the central mission of his art. He wasn't just an artist, he was an artist as a historian. He didn't just list famous names from history. He
He actively reinterpreted them. He took them apart. Get this piece. False. He paints Alexander the Great, one of history's ultimate conquerors, as this tiny, featureless figure, completely dwarfed by his own horse and some generic soldier. He's totally dismantling the heroic narrative, literally cutting a great man down to size.
And this is a theme you see again and again. His historical figures are never simple heroes or villains. Hannibal is the heroic African general invading Europe. Julius Caesar is the ambitious conqueror who gets assassinated by his own friends. Cleopatra and Dido are these powerful North African queens who become victims of Roman ambition. He was just fascinated by the rise and fall of power and how even the mightiest can be undone.
So what was he really doing? When you step back, you realize he was doing something truly radical. He was taking the master's tools, all those famous figures from the Western classical tradition, and he was using them to build a completely new house. He was constructing his own history of the world, one that put Black and African experience right at the center and forced everyone to re-examine the official story. And that brings us to the ultimate purpose of his whole project, to forge an entirely new way of understanding history and power. To understand his final move, you need to know about one more group from the ancient world, the Blemmyes. They were an African tribe who were constantly fighting the Roman Empire. But here's the really fascinating part. While they resisted Roman military power, they also absorbed and remixed Greek and Roman styles into their own art. And that, right there, that was Basquiat's whole position. He saw himself in the Blemmyes. He wasn't just rejecting the Western canon. That would be too easy. No, he was wrestling with it, absorbing it, and twisting its symbols to tell his own story of survival, of resistance, and of creating a powerful new identity. So Basquiat's work really leaves us with this one powerful question. We're always told that history is written by the victors, right? Well, his art shows us what happens when a brilliant voice from the margins picks up the pen, or in this case the paintbrush, and starts writing back. He doesn't just change art history, he challenges our whole understanding of history itself.